You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brennan Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is... Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today I'm super excited to have Kristin Bird on the show with me. She has an amazing new novel. It's called The Night She Went Missing, and I know it's only February, but this is one of my favorite books that I've read so far this year, and it will be at the top of your favorite books of 2022. I guarantee it. Run out and grab the book now. It's been available for a couple of days when you're hearing this, and we're going to talk all about it today. Welcome to the show, Kristin.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you. Kristin, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
I actually remember being in third or fourth grade, and I lived in a small town in North Alabama called Albertville. That's where all of my extended family is from. And the local printing press had a contest at the elementary school to see which team of students could write the best children's book. So my team wrote a Stuart Little style book about an adventurous mouse who went on all of these escapades around the house. And our team got chosen as the winner. So they actually turned it into a picture book, and we had to color the pictures and everything. And I just remember feeling really honored to be part of that team that was chosen. And I already loved writing and reading at that point, but I think that sparked something in me that I really wanted to have a book that was bound that could be in people's hands someday.
I love that. And what grade did you say you were in?
That was in third or fourth grade. I'm not sure. I actually called my mom this morning to ask, and she couldn't remember either.
So around 10 or 11 years old?
Yeah. Yep.
What a impressionable age that is. When what a great opportunity to have at that age, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That when things are really first connecting, and you're learning who you are, and to have an experience like that had to benefit you going down the road. Do you look back on that now and can you trace your trajectory where you are now back to that time of knowing that people do like what I do, and I can do this. It's achievable.
Yes, actually, after that point, I remember I would corral my little sister, who was 6 years younger than me, and I would make her put together books with me. So she would be, my little assistant editor.
Love that. That's so fun. You mentioned North Alabama, and I'm from the state right next door, Mississippi, and we have a rich history in the South, especially of storytellers and of storytelling. I love to ask people, how a sense of place affects them as a writer. Can you trace your Alabama roots to anything in storytelling? Do you think that there's any particular experience that feeds the storytelling?
Yes, and I actually think that's where I get some of that darkness in my storytelling, actually. My family is from Georgia and Alabama, but Alabama, in the past 50 to 75 years, so they've been there a long time. And the kinds of stories they would tell were always just laced with, just this side of dark, or sometimes even the humor would be dark. I remember sitting with my grandmother, and she was a twin. So she would sit there with her identical twin sister, and the two of them would just talk back and forth about their burial plots and what they wanted for their funerals and this other person who'd been buried. And I just grew up with a lot of like already thinking about what was to come.
That's so funny because it seems like especially the generation before us really thought a lot about that. I remember having conversations with my father-in-law before he passed and about, specific songs that he wanted at his funeral and things like that. And I remember thinking, you're not going to be there. It's this,
Right.
So much attention and to detail, went into these things. And there's something about finding the humor in darkness or
Yes.
seeing darkness in humor. Those are two interesting bedfellows.
Mm-hmm. Yes, my mother was actually a hospice nurse when I was growing up. And so she traveled around to the rural parts of Alabama and treated people, back in the hills and the valleys in North Alabama. And, when we got our pets came from one of her patients. And, we would sit around the dinner table and share our day, and she would share about her experiences. So I was just very familiar and almost comfortable with like the darker side of life, I feel like, from that experience, but not in a frightening way. I think it was actually formative in a positive way. It made me less scared, I think, of that darkness. So
that's, yeah, I can totally see that. Kristen, your day job now is a school teacher, from that formative experience that you told us about to now teaching school. What brought you to education?
I was living in Galveston, and I actually thought that I wanted to be a college professor. So I went back to get my master's, and I was planning to pursue my PhD. But while I was working on my master's degree, I began teaching part-time at the local high school in Galveston. I was teaching photography and journalism, and I just really fell in love with that age group. They, to me, are some of the funniest people that I meet are high schoolers. And so I actually decided not to go get my PhD and just keep teaching high school because I loved it so much. So I teach this year 9th, 11th, and 12th grade English. So I have quite a spread of students.
That's awesome.
Things We Never Got Over, the new book by best-selling author Lucy Score. Bearded bad boy barber Knox refers to live his life the way he takes his coffee, alone, unless you count his basset hound Waylon. Knox doesn't tolerate drama even when it comes in the form of a stranded runaway bride. Naomi wasn't just running away from her wedding, she was riding to the rescue of her estranged twin to Knockemout, Virginia, a rough-around-the-edges town where disputes are settled the old-fashioned way, with fist and beer, usually in that order. Too bad for Naomi, her evil twin hasn't changed at all. After helping herself to Naomi's car and cash, Tina leaves her with something unexpected. The niece Naomi didn't know she had. Now she's stuck in town with no car, no job, no plan, and no home, with an 11-year-old going on 30 to take care of. There's a reason Knox doesn't do complications or high-maintenance women, especially not the romantic ones. But since Naomi's life imploded right in front of him, the least he can do is help her out of her jam. And just as soon as she stops getting into new trouble, he can leave her alone and get back to his peaceful, solitary life. At least that's the plan until the trouble turns to real danger. Things We Never Got Over, the new book by best-selling author Lucy Score. An Innocent Client, the first book in the Joe Dillard legal thriller series. A preacher is found brutally murdered in a Tennessee motel room. A beautiful, mysterious young girl is accused. In this best-selling debut, criminal defense lawyer Joe Dillard has become jaded over the years as he's tried to balance his career against his conscience. Savvy but cynical, Dillard wants to quit doing criminal defense, but he can't resist the chance to represent someone who might actually be innocent. His drug-addicted sister has just been released from prison, and his mother is succumbing to Alzheimer's, but Dillard's commitment to the case never wavers despite the personal troubles and professional demands that threaten to destroy him. Chosen by BookBub readers as one of the top 100 crime novels of all time, Get started on this great series with An Innocent Client, where it all started. Read for free with Kindle Unlimited or buy it in paperback or audiobook. An Innocent Client by Scott Pratt. Dabble is a proud sponsor of Author Stories. Dabble is an easy-to-use, cloud-based writing tool that gives writers a way to organize, plot, and create amazing stories wherever they are. Write in our desktop app on your Mac or Windows computer, tablet, or mobile device. Dabble syncs your latest version with the cloud on all your devices. Write anywhere and anytime inspiration strikes. We got you. Dabble is my preferred writing tool, and I think it will be yours as well. Visit dabblewriter.com for your free trial.
That's awesome. A lot of us have experiences when we're younger where we know that we are storytellers and that we will write a book and publish it one day. And then, life gets in the way and we start raising families and we get jobs and start having to pay bills and all of that. But that writing bug always has a way of coming back around. And we know that it did for you because we're here talking about your new book today. What was it that brought you back around and gave you, the desire to get the story out?
Yes, that's a great question. I actually wrote my first full-length novel as part of my master's program. It was my creative writing thesis. And that experience was really positive because I had some hand-holding along the way with professors and their critiques and their advice. And then I graduated, and like you said, life got in the way. I started working full-time. I had my oldest daughter, who's now 11 years old. And then I had twins 2 years and some months later. So all of a sudden I was consumed with the mom thing, and the full-time job. So I actually started writing as just kind of an outlet for my own creativity a few months after my twins were born. And I would just write for maybe an hour on Saturday, go get a cup of coffee, escape my crazy household for a little while, and just sit and write. And it was very therapeutic for myself just to have something that was like entirely mine. And that then took me to writing a novel over about 4 years or so, maybe even a little bit longer, because it was such a period of starts and stops. And that one I did query pretty widely, and no one took it on. So at one point, I had the thought of, maybe I should just quit. Maybe I should just give up on this. And that lasted about a week. And then I decided I am a writer and I just have to write. And I thought, well, if no one else ever reads it, then at least it's good for my own mental health. So
Sure,
I'm just going to keep writing. So that's when I decided to start writing this contemporary novel, The Night She Went Missing.
What happened to that thesis project, the novel that came out of that?
It is sitting in my hard drive. And I don't know if anyone will ever see it. So it was definitely a learning experience, though.
Yeah. That is fascinating to me because I hear stories from different writers and in one hand you've got people that have written multiple novels and then get to the point where they've written a novel that is accepted by the market and is published. And some people write a first novel and just keep going back to that and revising and revising and revising until, it becomes publishable and then they sell it and that is their debut novel. Can you weigh in on that at all about the difference in what that feeling is that in starting a new project and being able to let that past project go versus being so ingrained in that early project that you have to keep getting it right? Do you feel anything one way or another about those two kind of polar opposites?
Right. So I'll talk about my second novel, actually, the one that took me about 4 or 5 years to write that didn't get published. I felt like I was still learning a lot about the craft of writing. And I thought, well, I'm going to give this the best chance I can. I'm going to make it as good as I can personally get it without, paying someone bukus of money to help me fix it, since I didn't have the professors and that kind of thing guiding me. And the only reason I was really able to let it go was because I queried it to about 100 people, and I had a handful of people who wanted who made full request, a handful of agents. But for me, I knew that publishing was something that I wanted to be as at least like a part-time career for me. And I thought, well, if I get to 100 and it hasn't happened, then maybe it's time for me to try something else. The other thing that helped is that second project was actually a dual point of view. And the one point of view was contemporary, and then one point of view was set in the 1910s. And so I found that the contemporary voice came a lot more naturally to me. And I realized that I was really struggling with that historical fiction voice. And I love to read historical fiction, so I really admire authors in that genre. But I thought, well, if this is the voice that's really working for me, maybe I should try an entire novel in this contemporary voice. And so that's why I decided to go ahead and just switch genres altogether and try something different. It just felt more natural and fitting to where I'm at right now as a writer.
How long have you been a fan of the thriller or suspense genre?
Probably since I started reading Leanne Moriarty in probably the early 2010s, early to mid 2010s. I love all of her novels. And I know that some of her earlier ones were more the women's fiction, somewhat romance, but I still feel like all of them had that kind of darker side and a sense of humor that was just really like spot on and maybe a little biting at times. So I think that she is the one really who pulled me into this genre. And I actually took one of her novels, I believe it was Big Little Lies, and I used it as a sort of mentor text, like I tell my students to do. And I mapped out what she did in each chapter, just quick outlining for myself so that I could see how it worked. I kind of dissected it as a kind of study project for myself.
Gotcha. The new book is set in Houston, or excuse me, in Galveston, but you live outside of Houston, right? When you mentioned earlier that you lived in Galveston when you were in college, and that kind of partially answered a question for me. But why did you choose to set it in Galveston, even though you live, in the same state, a little ways away in Houston? What was it about the setting that really appealed to you?
I think it was that Galveston surprised me. It felt like unlike any other place I had lived. And growing up, my family moved around a lot. So hometown was always Albertville, Alabama, but we lived in Virginia, Alabama, California, Oregon, and then finally came to Texas when I was in high school. And when my husband and I went to Galveston, we were probably 24, 25, but I was working on my master's degree there. And we started realizing that all of the expectations we'd brought to this place that we were living, that it would be a tourist town and that it would be beachy, that those were true, but there was also something else happening there. So there was very much an artistic vibe. There was a lot of history that we kind of knew about in the periphery, but we hadn't realized how much that had influenced the island. I mean, the 1900 storm happened there, and 6,000 people plus, lost their lives in that storm. And it really changed the trajectory of the island. Before the 1900 storm, it was known as a city that could rival Paris or New York. And after the 1900 storm, a lot of people moved off the island and a lot of the wealth left. And so it became a place that had a lot more poverty than I actually realized just as a tourist. So, the downtown area of Galveston is called the Strand. And we would go down there and hang out and get a bite to eat, whatever. Well, I started realizing that about 2 blocks from there was a lot of poverty, a lot of drug use, a lot of just people who were hurting. And I actually ended up volunteering a time or two at a place that helped people like that. And so I guess it was the juxtaposition of that, we're here to have fun and be tourists, with the reality of the poverty that was there that was really intriguing to me. And then, of course, the other thing is that it's on an island, so there's very few ways to escape. And that always intrigued me and just kind of left me with this feeling of like, oh, this could be a place that you would have to get off of in time, like when Hurricane Harvey happened, people got stuck on the causeway because they didn't leave in time. So that just always interested me as well. I actually had a friend who worked in the virology department at UTMB, and she told me one time, because she had level 3 clearance, and level 4 was like the highest level, and it was for Ebola. And she said, I've got level 3 clearance, and the reason that they put the virology lab on the island is so that if anything gets out, they can close off all the exits to the island.
Oh, no.
And I cannot confirm that. I don't know if that's true at all.
Man.
But that idea...
I'm not going to be able to sleep at night now.
You might not want to go there. I'm just kidding.
Oh, mercy. Kristen, one of my favorite things to ask people is this question about where stories begin. Because in one moment, the night she went missing did not exist in any form, fashion, or it just didn't exist. And then either a character walked onto the stage of your mind, or you started, playing the what if game based on maybe something you read or a news story you saw, or whatever, the catalyst was. And then, in some form or fashion, the night she went missing did exist. And then it was your job as the writer to dig that story out and excavate it and dust it off and, do all the things that writers do to bring it out to the world. What was that first moment of inspiration for the night she went missing?
So I was teaching journalism in 2018, I believe it was. I usually teach English, but I had stepped in for 1 year to teach that class at the school I'm at now. And we read a feature article from the New Yorker by Rachel Aviv, and it was called How a Young Woman Lost Her Identity. And we read it as a mentor text, to see how we could mimic some of the great writing that she had done in our own writing. And it was the story of Hannah Up. And she's a young woman who actually went missing 3 times. And the first time she went missing, she was found floating near the Statue of Liberty, New York. And no one knew where she'd been, and she couldn't remember what had happened to her over the previous weeks. Since then, she actually has not been seen since September 2017, and I believe she was in the Virgin Islands at the time. But she had a condition, dissociative amnesia, and that just got my mind spinning with all of the things that could happen during a time when someone couldn't remember where they had been or what they'd been doing, how people might take advantage of that or help them through something like that. And so that's when my mind began to churn with all of the what ifs. So I believe I started writing it at the end of 2019.
So you said earlier that one of the things that you loved about teaching was this age group of kids, and that you just loved being around them. Emily, one of the main characters in the book, is that kind of character. She's a teenager. Did you initially feel a kinship with her, that this was a voice that you could really get in touch with?
Yes, she is the first voice that I wrote, and hers felt the most natural to me. I feel like in some ways she is a younger version of myself in the way that she thinks about the world and processes the world around her. But I feel like I'm able to tap into that because I'm with my students and I hear them speaking and I hear how they're thinking, and I read it in their essays. I really enjoy reading their personal essays about the things that they've been through that have been impactful to them or meaningful in some way.
This book is a suspense thriller, but really fueled by a mystery. When effectively telling a mystery story, there are certain ways that you need to get information across to the reader a little at a time, where the reader is figuring out what's going on along with you, so that you're not just feeding them information, but they're not second guessing and getting ahead of the writer, so to speak. There's an interesting balance that needs to happen between what you do tell them and then, what clues you give them. How does your writing style support this type of writing? Are you a pantser or a plotter? Do you think much about the storyline ahead of time before you start the writing, or are you kind of figuring it out as you go?
Definitely figuring it out as I go. I'm a pantser. I do start giving myself a rough outline about halfway through the novel. I also go back and do heavy revisions. I mean, I often say that my first drafts are pretty much unreadable. I don't let anyone look at them because I don't think they make much sense. So I will probably revise something 15 times before I ever show it to an editor. So there's a lot of going back and combing through and taking out and putting in, and that's really my process for figuring out which kind of crumbs to drop. And then my editor and my agent were both so great at helping me with the pacing of that. I feel like that was my biggest learning curve with this novel, because it was the first suspense novel I'd written, and I really needed to refine the pace of a suspense and how to keep reminding someone what the overarching goal was, to find out what had happened to Emily, where she's been, what happened the night she went missing.
So we know that this family moves to Galveston from the Pacific Northwest because of something else that happens. When did that little nugget of story information come to you, and when did you realize that this needed to be a family that was already dealing with something that then allowed this other thing to happen? I'm trying to kind of speak and without giving too much away, and I want you to say what you're comfortable with telling about the story.
Right. So, like I said, my family actually moved here from Portland, Oregon. So I felt like I knew that area well enough that I could speak to what it was like to live there a little bit in the backstory parts. And the mother of Emily, yes, has had a huge career crisis and basically had to leave her career because of something that happened. And I actually made her a music professor because my undergrad was in music and journalism. I have a very eclectic degree collection, very interdisciplinary. So I felt like I also was able to kind of tap into that music world a little bit. I'm sure if my music professors read it, they would be like, no, you didn't do it right. But I tried. And so that's how I, decided what her career path would be. I wanted to create conflict already with them moving there, because I think that that's how real life is a lot of times. Things are very rarely cut and dry and simple, especially when we make a big move. So you're either carrying something from your past, or you've got hopes for the future that may or may not be realized. And so I wanted all of that kind of swirling around this family before I put them in a situation that was even more harrowing. It's kind of a warm-up for them.
The book offers a few different perspectives, the viewpoints, as we go along. What did this offer you as the writer, to kind of switch up the viewpoint and to let the reader see other things that were going on? Kind of talk through the decision to include those.
So I will make a little confession here, a writing confession. At one point, this book had 9 or 10 viewpoints. So really over the top. And my agent is the one who was like, let's narrow this down a little bit. So now we have 3 mothers on the island, and then we also have Emily, the missing girl, who comes in and out of the narrative. And I wanted this novel really at the heart of it to be about mothers and the lengths that they will go to protect their children or to defend their children, to keep their children from harm. And so I wanted each of those 3 women to have their own kind of time center stage to show why they would go to such lengths to protect a child that maybe might not even always be someone you should protect.
Yeah.
Because, a couple of the mothers are the ones who are trying to clear their children's names from any involvement in what's happened.
Gotcha. Kristen, this is your debut book, right?
Yes.
Now that this book is kind of off your desk and it just hit the store shelves a couple of days ago, and there's kind of the initial flurry of promotion and things like that, but soon that all kind of wanes, and the reality for a writer is when that book is out, you're staring at the blank page all over again. Do you have any idea what the next project is? Are you working on anything yet?
Yes, actually, I signed a 2-book deal with Mira, and so my next novel comes out March 2023, and I'm in the middle of editing that right now. And that one actually is set in a fictitious version of the town I grew up in, North Alabama. And so it's really fun to kind of return to that area and think of a suspense story that could kind of, encompass my family there.
Yeah. I love it. I can't wait to see what's going to come from that. The Night She Went Missing is available everywhere now. When you're hearing this, there's going to be links to it in the show notes where you can go grab it in Kindle edition, or if you want to hold the paper in your hands and do it that way. Kristen, is there going to be an audiobook edition of this?
Yes, there will be.
Have you heard any of the production of it yet?
I haven't yet. I'm so excited to hear it.
I know that's going to be fantastic. I bet. I can't wait until it drops. But if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff you're doing, is there a place online where they can connect with you, Kristen?
Sure. I have a website. It's KristinBird.com. Bird like the birds that fly outside. And my Instagram is @KristinBirdWrites.
Great. We'll link those up to make it easier for folks to find you. The Night She Went Missing, available everywhere now. Go grab it today, or use the links in the show notes to grab it from Amazon. Kristen, this has been so much fun chatting. Thank you for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you so much. It's been a delight.
Now stay tuned for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Mather steepled his hands. You asked to join us once? Hedwig leaned forward, eagerly. The Appointed. Does that appeal? Yes. Do you even know what we do? My grandmother used to say that you control the world. That's not far off. But why? To what end? I don't know. Power? Pour me a bourbon. Mather reached into his briefcase and produced a file folder. I want to tell you one story. Have you ever heard of Centralia, Pennsylvania? No. He produced a photo for Hedwig's inspection. Spring of 1962. A pretty little town, wasn't it? Whitewash and ticky-tacky, pastel housewives and perfect lawns. A mining community, mostly. Coal. He turned over a second photo. A lovely young woman. There was a single witch in Centralia named Anna Lively. Anna had a green thumb. She could make her garden grow, whisper to a flower, and send it shooting from the ground like that. Just lovely. But she was discovered. That spring, a boy named Bobby Avery received a Bell & Howell Zoomatic movie camera for his 11th birthday. Bobby amused himself by filming his neighbors, sometimes without their knowledge, through windows and over garden fences. 12 seconds of film. Just a girl and her garden patch, and one swiftly blooming rose. It killed the town. Bobby showed it to his friends. Children believe readily. Bobby was the first to die. Parents looked into it, watched the film themselves, and they began to die. Anna disappeared. Perhaps they attacked her. Perhaps she escaped. But even in her absence, knowledge of a true witch was running wild through the population, as if Anna had beckoned it herself to grow verdant and spread. The great curse had killed 64 Centralians by the 1st of June. The footage was offered to a national news organization. That was the precipice. It might have been shown in prime time, between Leave It to Beaver and My Three Sons. We came very close to another worldwide calamity, but we were fortunate. One of our own was in place at the network. He alerted his superiors, and they ended the situation. Do you know how? I'm afraid to ask. Mather laid down another photo. This is Centralia today. It was an aerial view of a forest. Endless trees and underbrush cut through by lanes of pavement. Just a maze of cracking asphalt, like the foundations of Sodom, ripped bare by the wrath of God. Only a cemetery remained, on a hill overlooking the former town. A white marble angel stood among the graves, grieving for the ruins below, like Lot's wife, turned to salt. You destroyed the whole town? Not I. This was well before my time, but yes. Just as you'd cauterize a wound to stop a patient from bleeding to death. We blamed it on an uncontrollable mine fire, deep below the earth. We actually set the coal burning, in case someone investigated. It burns today. Touch any of those streets and you'll find them hot, the asphalt melting as if the town sat just above perdition. It's not something we're proud of, but it was necessary to save the world. Centralia, Pennsylvania, and everyone who'd seen that film had to be sacrificed. Mather collected the photos. So, that is why the appointed exist, and that is what we do. Still want to join?